for a studio that didn't recognize our contribution. And he said, well, what would you ask for? I said, $1 million and Steven Spielberg guaranteed as director. Click. And they have hung up on that notion for the last 50 years and refused to bonus us. And I say, and I mean it, and I one day got pissed off and finally wrote a letter. And a friend of mine is the father of the then head of production at Universal, and I was talking to him and saying, there's a film that they own, that Universal owns, that we want to remake, and why don't you call them and see if we can get it? So he called his son, and then he called me, and he was laughing, and he said, your name is shit at Universal. And it was. And I found out that that letter that I wrote had been copied and planted on the front door of every department at Universal with an added line that says, we do not cooperate with Richard Dreyfuss on anything for any reason under any circumstances. Wow. And thank you. And that's why.
Ouch. And you know what, in the essence of fairness, I once was asked to accept an award in Arizona for Zanuck and Brown. And a friend of mine who's a friend of Richard's, Marty Nadler, wrote me this line. And it was, you've got to hand it to two guys who pulled millions out of the water without even getting wet. And that kind of sums it up. It's true.
Now, are you guys able to, working on a film like this, are you able to separate yourself enough that when you go in, sit in the theater and watch it, that it has the same effect on you as it does the rest of the audience?
Well, it did for years, and after a while, I started to watch it because of of the brilliance within which it was shot. I mean, Stephen literally had to reconceive this film. Once we got to the island, we discovered that the shark never worked, and the shark would rise up out of the water and go, and it never worked. So Stephen had to reconceive of how he was going to tell the story from the very beginning. And he did. If anything is an act of genius, it is that he, without stopping the shoot, he reconceived of how he was going to tell the story and keep people frightened. And it was an amazing thing to watch. And I remember him taking the time to shoot my tennis shoes as they land on the side of the boat and go down. And I thought, what are we shooting that for? What the hell? And then I realized when the film was put together, what he had done was to put together short, intense films within the larger, intense film. And it was an amazing thing to keep in your head. And he did it. And he has, you know, he deserves it. He deserves being crowned with that film. And we deserve whatever it was that we didn't get.
Well, now that brings up another question. You've worked with him three times, or there's more than three? Three times. And if you had a negative experience, at least with the producers, why did you say, no, I still need to work with Steven Spielberg?
Well, because I wasn't being asked to work with the producers. I was asked to work with Stephen. And I didn't blame Stephen for that. Although maybe I should. No, Stephen is a filmmaker, and I'm a filmmaker, and I didn't have to have my negative attitude about Brown and Zanuck reinforced. I needed to make Close Encounters. And when I heard during Jaws that Stephen's next film was this film, Close Encounters, I said to myself, no actor but me is going to play that role, even if I have to kill. And it's a well-known kind of cliche that actors badmouth actors. In this case, it was true. I badmouthed every actor on earth. Al Pacino has no sense of humor. Robert De Niro was crazy. Just walked by his office and tossed these fuck bombs in. And one day I said, Stephen, you need a child. And he did. In order to make the character work, he needed a child, an adult who was a kid. And ain't nobody else in that box. And so he looked up and said, you got the part. I'm not sorry or afraid or guilty or anything.
Before we go ahead and open it up to questions, I wanted to ask you one more quick thing. I'm just listening to the interesting timbre of your voice and thinking, I would like to hear an audio version of your book. Are you doing one? An audio version of your book?
Oh, yes. Yes, I am. I'm recording it right now, and it'll be finished in about 3 weeks, and it's good. It's really good because it'll get you pissed off. Yeah. And that's what you need.
Yeah. All righty, and now it's time for us to open it up. Over on our left, there is the mic, and please, when you get up to the mic, quickly, please state your name and let us know what your question is.
Go for it. Hello, my name is James J.J. Jones. I'm deaf from Overland Park, Kansas. First of all, I want to thank Planet Comicon to provide the best interpreters. Thank you. I wanted to ask a question to Mr. Dreyfuss. I love the movie, Mr. Holland Opus. The beautiful movie. What was your best memory in that movie while you were in Mr. Holland Opus? What was your best memory?
Actually, there's a fabulous story. The man who wrote this movie, a well-known writer in Hollywood, and he had written a movie about this teacher. And one day he was in a traffic jam in West LA, and he kept waiting for someone to explain to everyone who was trapped what was going on. And this cop walked by, and the writer said, so what's holding things up? And he said, oh, there are some people striking ahead of you. And who's striking? And he said, it's a bunch of people with those, strike announcements, and they're teachers. And our writer listened to that, thought about it for about 2 seconds, and then turned his car around and went home and wrote Mr. Holland's Opus in 2 weeks. And he had been reminded of what he owed to his teachers. And that's no exaggeration.
Great story.
And he gave it. He gave it to the teachers. He just said, these people were indispensable in creating his moral character. And he decided to redo whatever the story he was writing and tell it as he felt it. And I got the script a few weeks later, and I didn't hesitate for an instant, and it was like watching people all over the city just go, oh yeah, we gotta do this one. Because, I mean, not every film has meaning, not every film is as morally upright and yet theatrically interesting. And this one was. Every person who ever saw this film saw a movie that everyone in our country can relate to. And if you didn't have a teacher like the teacher, Mr. Holland, then I am sorrier than I can possibly express. And the teachers that I had in the public school systems were all, to the last one, people I owe, and I regret everyone who died, who was a teacher of mine, who didn't get to feel what we felt. I had a teacher who, she was a bitch. And she was an impatient person who was always, frustrated with our dumbness. And one day, about 20 years after I was out of her school, I realized that I owed her so much, because everything I'd ever come to love in my life, I had learned in her class. So I found her, and she was retired to San Diego, which is where I live now. And the joke was, San Diego is where Republican history teachers go to retire. And I called her. Hello? Mrs. Wilcox? Yes? You won't remember me. I was in your 6th and 7th grade history class at Horace Mann, and I just wanted you to know that everything I have ever come to love in my life, I learned in your class. And she said, thank you very much, and hung up.
It's so funny.
Keep in touch.
And as I recall, that was another Oscar nomination for Richard Dreyfuss. Am I correct?
Yep.
Mr. Holland's Opus. Terrific.
Yes, it was. And I think I would have won it had I not been caught with that underage. Oh,
That's so funny.
All right, next up, who has a question for us?
Hey, I'm Ashley. I wanted to see how both of you prepared for your roles. Like, did you follow a deputy around? Did you have any voting experience? You tied a lot of knots. Did someone have to teach you how to do the knots? Did you already know about the knots? So just, like, your preparation.
If someone set you up to ask this, I didn't know a knot from a no. And I was taught what I was taught. And then during the shoot, Robert throws me a rope and says, do something or other. And I did, and I threw it back, and it landed on his face. And his eyes got like this. And he took the fire hose and he aimed it from behind the camera. He aimed it at my face. So that was us. It was great. It was the greatest acting experience I'd ever had. And I learned more from him than anyone else. And I think we all did. I mean, you know, Jeffrey was not a producer, he was an actor. And at that time, you know, we were living 3 blocks from each other, and we would talk about it all the time. And Jeffrey was playing this authority figure, you know, the sheriff, the deputy. And so we talk about Robert all the time. And we both knew that we were given a privilege of working with Robert. And that's how it was, period. But 30 years later, all of a sudden, people are talking about the feud between Richard and Robert. And there was no feud. There was nothing negative about our relationship. And it hurt. Robert was dead by that time. And people were talking about this feud. And let me tell you, it was a privilege and an honor to work with Robert. No kidding around.
Jeffrey, did you...
he was never around very much for me. But he had to leave the country because of tax reasons constantly, I know. But, you know, the truth is, I was so grateful to have this job. And that first day, when I find the first body, was the first day of principal photography. I was so nervous, I could have dearly thrown up, easily. And, you know, I was the recipient of the shark not working in many ways, because they'd add new scenes. And little by little, I'd creep in and there'd be a little extra bit and a little something else I could do. And I was thrilled at this. And when I look back on it, and I think, my God, this was a perfect creative storm in the sense that everything went wrong. The shark didn't work, this didn't work, say the weather blew away certain things, they didn't shoot anything for the whole day because the boats pulled, and there was, you know, big boats in the background and whatever, and you had to, those days you had to wait for them to pass. And it all worked out so perfectly. It was almost like God said, all right, sharks, yeah, you can win this one. It was unbelievable.
All right, we have another question.